Welcome back to the myth of Logos. The engineer who searched for the hinge, Descartes' mind body dualism, and the problem of interaction. The kingdom had two palaces, built so differently from one another that visitors sometimes refused to believe they belonged to the same crown. One was cut from stone, heavy, load bearing, measured in exact cubits from floor to rafter, full of levers, gears, and weighted chains that moved the whole machinery of the court, its guards, its gates, its bells. The other was built, if built was even the word, from something that masons had no name for. It had no measurable walls. You couldn't say where it began or how many cubits across it ran, because it didn't run across anything. Inside it lived the queen, who was said to have no location at all in the ordinary sense, not hiding somewhere unfound, but simply not the kind of thing that occupies a place. And yet the two palaces plainly worked together. When the queen decided the gates should open, the gears in the stone palace turned, and it opened. When something struck the stone palace hard enough, a battering ram, a falling beam, the queen, by every account, felt it, though nothing had touched her, since nothing could touch a thing with no surface to strike. King Bertrand found this arrangement completely satisfactory for most of his reign. It worked. That was enough for a king. But in his old age, restless with the kind of curiosity that comes from having settled every other question, he summoned his most exacting engineer, a woman named Corvina, and gave her a single commission: find the hinge. Somewhere, he insisted, there must be a point, a spring, a valve, a joint, where the stone palace and the glass that wasn't glass palace actually met, where the pushing of one became the moving of the other. Corvina took the commission seriously in the way she took everything seriously. She mapped the stone palace gear by gear, chain by chain, until she could account for every motion inside it by the motion just before it. This lever pulled because that weight dropped. That weight dropped because this chain released. It was, top to bottom, an unbroken chain of pushes and pulls, entirely explicable in its own terms, extended and measurable at every step. Then she turned to the Queen's palace and found she could account for nothing that way. There was no lever to trace, because nothing in that palace had a shape for a lever to catch on. The Queen's decisions simply arrived, whole, with no visible antecedent made of gears. Corvina interviewed her at length, and came away with the uncomfortable sense that the Queen's realm ran on an entirely different kind of law, not forced, transmitted through contact, but something closer to thought, reason following reason. There's no cubit of distance traveled between them at all, which left the hinge nowhere to be found. If the stone palace's gears only ever move because something else with size and shape pushes on them, and the queen has no size and no shape to push with, what exactly happens at the gate when she decides and the gears obey? Corvina searched every chamber for a room small enough, secret enough to be the meeting point. She narrowed it eventually to a single obscure chamber deep in the stone palace, smaller than any other, oddly unconnected to the main gearworks by any chain she could trace, and she declared, with more confidence than she privately felt, that this must be the room where it happened. She was never able to explain what happening meant in that room. She could point to it. She could not describe the mechanism inside it because a mechanism requires two things that share enough in common to make contact: a shape to push, a shape pushed. And here she had one palace built entirely of that, and one palace built entirely without it. She had located the address of the mystery. She had not solved it. King Bertrand thanked her, put her findings in the archive, and the two palaces went on working together exactly as before. The hinge, unexplained, and the kingdom, mostly indifferent to that fact. The two palaces aren't palaces. They're a picture of the most famous and most famously unresolved problem bequeathed to modern philosophy by René Descartes in the Meditations on First Philosophy, 1641. The relationship between mind and body under his doctrine of substance dualism. Descartes argues that reality contains two fundamentally distinct kinds of created substance. Res extensa, extended substance, is matter. Anything occupying space, measurable, divisible, governed by mechanical laws of contact and motion. Descartes was a committed mechanist about the physical world, including the human body, which he treats as an elaborate machine of levers, fluids, and nerves. The stone palace, gear for gear. Res cogitans, thinking, substance, is mind. Something was entire nature, is thought, and which Descartes insists has no extension whatsoever. It isn't located anywhere, isn't made of parts, isn't the kind of thing you could in principle divide or measure. The queen's palace with no cubits to it at all. The trouble is that Descartes also insists these two utterly different substances casually interact constantly. Your decision to raise your arm, mental, causes your arm to rise, physical. And the pain in your foot, physical, causes you to feel pain, mental. He even proposed a specific anatomical site for this interaction, the pineal gland, a small singular structure in the brain that he believed mistakenly was uniquely suited to the meeting point between two substances. This is Corvina's unconnected little chamber, almost exactly. The objection that exposed the depth of the problem came in Descartes' own correspondence, most sharply from Princess Elisabeth of Bohemia, who pressed him relentlessly in their letters. If mind has no extension and no shape, what could it possibly mean for it to push on something that does? Ordinary causation, as Descartes himself defines, physical causation, works by contact between extended things. A mind with no surface has nothing to make contact with. Naming a gland doesn't answer this, it only narrows down where the unexplained thing is supposed to happen, exactly as Corvina's search narrowed the address without ever producing the mechanism. This unresolved problem became one of the central engines of the philosophy that followed Descartes. Spinoza responded by rejecting the two substance picture entirely, arguing mind and body are two attributes of a single underlying substance, running in necessary parallel rather than casually interacting at all. Leibniz, confronting the same interaction problem, arrived at his own radical alternative, denying causal interaction between any created substances whatsoever, and proposing instead that mind and body run in perfect uncaused correspondence because both were set in motion from the start in a pre-established harmony. Two very different repairs, aimed at the same crack Descartes had left in the wall between his two palaces. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next episode.